There is a 40-second scene in Season 3 of Rick and Morty where Rick, faced with the option to simply walk away from everything, cannot do it. He tries, he fails. The show does not comment on this. Rick does not comment on this. It just happens. And the entire history of how that scene came to exist, the accidents, the secrets, the hidden plans, the stranger on Reddit who changed the direction of the show before it had finished its first season, is a story that most people who love this show have never heard. Rick and Morty told you everything from the beginning. It was in the catchphrase nobody understood. It was in the rocks nobody examined. It was in the name that got spoken once in Season 1 and then sat quietly for 5 years. It was all there. Today we are going to find all of it. Welcome to Ricktopus. Subscribe if you are new. Let us begin. The secret they agreed to never tell, and a fan cracked it. There is a moment in the history of Rick and Morty that almost nobody knows about. It happened quietly, somewhere between the show's first season and its second, in the comment section of a website most people use to argue about video games and share cat pictures. A fan, nobody knows who, sat down, thought carefully about the show they loved, and typed out a theory. They posted it. They probably went to sleep that night not thinking much of it. Harmon saw it the next morning, and the show was never the same. To understand why that moment matters, you have to go back to the very beginning of Rick and Morty. Not the first episode, before that. Back to when Harmon and Roiland were still building the bones of the show, still figuring out what kind of thing they were making. At some point during those early conversations, the creative team made a decision that most television shows never make. They decided to hide something. Not a cliffhanger, not a season finale reveal, something much bigger than that. They decided that the show would have a secret, a fundamental truth about its own world that they would never say out loud. They would plant clues, they would leave breadcrumbs, but they would never confirm it. Not in an episode, not in an interview, not ever. That was the deal they made with themselves. Keep the secret. Always keep the secret. What makes this so interesting is what the secret actually was. Harmon confirmed it in a 2021 interview. The original plan for Rick and Morty was that Rick and Morty are the same person. Not brothers, not just similar, not metaphorically connected. The same person. The idea was that Rick is an older version of Morty, a future Morty who somehow traveled back through time or across dimensions to end up living with his own family, watching his younger self grow up, dragging that younger self into the exact kinds of adventures that turned him into the broken genius he became. Rick was going to be proof of where Morty was headed. Every time Rick looked at Morty with that mixture of irritation and something softer underneath, it was going to mean something specific and devastating. He was not just looking at his grandson, he was looking at himself. Think about what that does to every scene in Season 1 if you watch it with that knowledge. Rick teaching Morty to be brave. Rick refusing to let Morty get too comfortable. Rick pushing Morty into situations that are terrifying, but that Morty always seems to survive, always seems to grow from. None of that is accidental mentoring. It is a man engineering his own past, building himself from the inside out. The writing team knew this. They were going to seed evidence of it across the show slowly, carefully, in ways that most viewers would miss on a first watch. The clues were going to be small. A look here, a line of dialogue there, a moment where Rick reacts to something in a way that does not quite make sense until you know the truth. They had a plan. They were executing it. And then a stranger on Reddit figured it out before the show even got through its first season. Nobody knows exactly which post it was. Harmon never identified the specific Reddit account because he had committed to keeping the secret, and naming the post would have been the same as confirming it. But he was clear about what happened. He saw the theory, he read it, he recognized how close it was to what the writers had planned, and he made a decision right there. If the audience could figure this out this early, the story had to change. He stopped going to Reddit after that. In his own words, it was an example of why he stays off Reddit. Not because he was angry at the fan who posted the theory. The opposite. He was too impressed. If one person had gotten that close, that fast, the secret was not safe. The slow, careful reveal they had spent months planning was already at risk of being spoiled before it could land. So Harmon pulled the thread. He changed the direction of the show. The idea that Rick and Morty are the same person was taken off the table as a planned story arc, and the writers went in a different direction entirely. Here is the part that gets genuinely strange. The alternate direction they chose was not a step backward. In some ways, it was deeper. With the Rick as future Morty storyline gone, the writers had to find a different answer to the most important question in the show. Who is Rick Sanchez, and how did he become this way? What they came up with eventually, developed across multiple seasons, revealed in pieces, was the story of a man who had a normal life once. A wife named Diane, a daughter named Beth who was very young, a house, a version of himself that was, by all appearances, happy. Then another Rick showed up, a colder Rick, one who had already traveled the universe and decided that attachment was a weakness. This other Rick tried tried to recruit our Rick into the multiverse, tried to convince him to leave his family and go on adventures across dimensions. Rick said no. He was happy where he was, so the other Rick bombed his house, killed Diane, killed young Beth, took everything from him in a single moment of violence. What came after was decades of anger that hollowed Rick out from the inside. He spent years hunting down the Rick who had done this. He killed versions of Rick across dozens of dimensions, maybe hundreds, looking for the specific one who had destroyed his life. He never found him, and somewhere in all that hunting, all that violence, all that failure, he stopped believing the search was going to work. He stopped believing much of anything was going to work. He became the person the audience meets in the pilot episode, brilliant, broken, and so determined to make nihilism feel like a choice that he turned it into a personality. That is the backstory that replaced the other one. It is not a worse story. It is a different kind of tragedy. Instead of a man trapped watching his own past, you have a man trapped in his own grief. Instead of time loops and identity puzzles, you have something almost simpler and somehow harder. A person who had everything taken from them and then spent so long being angry about it that the anger became the only thing they knew how to be. A fan on Reddit did not just guess a plot twist. They genuinely changed what the show was going to be about. What is interesting when you sit with that is how rarely it happens in television. Shows are protective of their secrets. Writers guard their plans carefully. The normal outcome of a fan guessing something is that the writers stay the course anyway, and the fan gets to feel briefly brilliant when the reveal lands. The story still plays out the way it was always going to play out. Harmon's decision to actually change the show in response to a fan theory is unusual enough that it deserves to be treated as something more than a piece of trivia. It is a real creative decision with real consequences, and it shaped everything about Rick and Morty from that point forward. There's also something almost funny about it if you step back far enough. The show is obsessed with the idea that Rick is always the smartest person in any room. He is 2 steps ahead of every threat, every trap, every plan. He sees what other people miss. He solves problems before other people realize there are problems to solve. And then an anonymous fan on the internet outthought the writers of the show, got too close to the answer, forced a change that nobody expected. In a show full of moments where a small, underestimated person does something that a genius could not see coming, the most real-world version of that story happened off-camera, in a Reddit thread, before most of the show had even been written. There is one more layer to this that does not get talked about enough. Harmon and Roiland did not make the secret public when they changed the plan. They could have. They could have said in an interview, "We had this idea, a fan figured it out, we went a different direction." They did not. The creative team continued to carry the original secret even after it stopped being relevant to what they were building. Harmon only confirmed the Rick as Morty concept years later, and even then, only in indirect terms. The commitment to secrecy outlasted the secret itself, which means there is still a question worth asking. If that was the original plan, the one the fan identified, was there another secret running underneath it? The one they agreed to keep and never did confirm? The clues they planted? The illusions they built into the show? Did those point toward Rick as Morty, or toward something else entirely? Because Harmon said the fan got close. He did not say the fan was exactly right. The smartest person in any room does not always say everything they know, and neither, apparently, does Dan Harmon. What is certain is this: the show that exists is not the show that was originally planned. A version of Rick and Morty exists somewhere in the space of discarded ideas, where every time Rick looks at Morty with that strange, unreadable expression, there was going to be a reason for it that changed everything you thought you were watching. That version was killed by a Reddit post. The one that replaced it gave us something else. A Rick with a real past, a real wound, a real reason for being the way he is. Both versions are about the same thing underneath: a man who lost himself and cannot find his way back. The show just found 2 different ways to tell that story, and a stranger on the internet decided which one we were going to see. That stranger does not know this. They probably never will. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, all of that is about what Rick became after his plans were changed. But there is a moment in Season 1, buried inside what looks like a nonsense catchphrase, where the show told you exactly how much pain Rick was in from the very beginning, and almost nobody heard it. Section 2. The central finite curve was hiding in plain sight. Since Season 1, most people think they know what Rick and Morty is about. A genius scientist and his grandson travel through infinite dimensions, go on crazy adventures, and come back home. The whole point is that anything is possible because there are infinite universes. Every version of every person exists somewhere. Every outcome has already happened in some reality. The multiverse is the whole show. It is the engine that makes everything run. Except it was never actually infinite, and the show told you this in Season 1. Barely anyone caught it. In Season 1, Episode 10, a Council of Ricks member is confronting Rick C-137, the main Rick the audience follows, and says something very specific specific to him. He says, "Of all the Ricks in the central finite curve, you are the malcontent." That phrase, the central finite curve, gets said once. Rick does not explain it. Nobody asks what it means. The scene moves on. Most viewers heard it as science fiction background noise. One of those things the show throws out to make the world feel big. The kind of detail that sounds important, but probably is not. It was the most important detail in the entire episode. It just took 5 more seasons for anyone to find out why. Here is what the central finite curve actually is. The multiverse in Rick and Morty is genuinely infinite. There are an endless number of realities, versions of Earth, versions of the universe, versions of every person who has ever existed. But Rick and the other Ricks did not travel through all of those realities freely. They built a wall, a massive, invisible boundary that separated a specific chunk of the multiverse from everything else. Inside that wall, every universe where Rick is the smartest being alive. Every universe where Rick is on top, where Rick is the most powerful, where Rick wins. Outside that wall, everything else. Every universe where someone smarter than Rick exists. Every universe where Rick is not special. Every universe where Rick loses. The Ricks built themselves a room inside infinity and called it the whole house. This means that every time Rick fired up his portal gun across the entire run of the show and said something like anywhere in the universe, what he actually meant was anywhere in the specific slice of the universe where I am guaranteed to be the smartest person in the room. The adventures were real. The dimensions were real. But the freedom that Rick always presented as the point of everything, the freedom to go anywhere, to do anything, to exist without limits, was a performance. He built the limits himself and then acted like they did not exist. Think about what that means for every episode you have ever watched. Every time Rick walked into an alien world and immediately dominated the situation. Every time Rick had the answer when nobody else did. Every time Rick was 2 steps ahead of whatever threat was coming. All of it took place in a carefully selected group of universes specifically designed to make sure Rick would always come out on top. The deck was stacked. Rick stacked it himself. And then he traveled through that stacked deck for what appears to be decades, telling everyone, including himself, that he was just naturally the best. That is not confidence. That is fear with extremely good engineering behind it. The show planted the name of this concept in season 1, and then let it sit in the background for years. There were small hints along the way if you were looking for them. In season 3, episode 7, the episode that follows the stories of regular citizens living in the Citadel of Ricks, there is a throwaway line about a version of Rick whose origin is described as 60 iterations off the curve. That version of Rick, called Simple Rick, is different from all the others. He found happiness just by watching his daughter Beth grow up. He did not need to be the smartest being in the universe. He was content. The show used him as a punchline, his tears of genuine joy harvested to flavor a snack food sold to the other Ricks. But the detail underneath the joke is that being further from the curve, further from the system Rick built, seemed to produce a Rick who was actually at peace. Most viewers saw Simple Rick as a sad comedy bit. It was actually the show quietly showing you what Rick could have been if he had never built the curve in the first place. The full explanation of what the curve is and why it exists finally arrived in the season 5 finale. Evil Morty, a version of Morty who had appeared in season 1, vanished, spent years working toward a single goal in secret, and finally returned, stood in front of Rick, and explained everything in a way the show had never done before. He called the curve a wall around infinity. He described how the Ricks had taken infinite possibility and reduced it to a managed collection of realities where they were always the winner. He said it plainly. They separated all the infinite universes from all the infinite universes where Rick is the smartest man in the universe. Evil Morty's plan was to get out. He wanted to leave the curve entirely and travel to the part of the multiverse that the Ricks had locked away. The part where Rick is not automatically the best. The part where Morty, or any Morty, might actually be free from the system Rick built. To do this, he needed one specific thing. He needed the schematics for how the curve was originally constructed. And those schematics existed in only one place, inside Rick C-137's mind. Not the Council of Ricks, not the Citadel database, not any other Rick in any other universe. The original blueprint for the central finite curve lived specifically in the main Rick's head, which tells you something extremely important about who actually built it. Every other Rick in the Citadel had access to the curve. They used it constantly, but none of them could tell you how to take it apart because none of them had designed it from scratch. Rick C-137 had. He was the architect. The curve was his idea, his construction, his prison that he helped build and then walked away from, leaving everyone else inside it. Evil Morty broke into that memory, got what he needed, and at the end of the Season 5 finale, he fired a portal gun with yellow portal fluid instead of the usual green. Yellow, not green. That color difference matters enormously. Every Rick everywhere always uses green portal fluid. That is what green portals do. They open doors within the curve, within the managed portion of the multiverse where Rick is always the best. Yellow portal fluid had never appeared in the show before that moment. It opened a door outside the curve entirely. Evil Morty walked through it into a part of the multiverse that no Rick had ever been able to reach, or had ever wanted to reach, and the portal closed behind him. He was free in a way no Morty had ever been free before, because he was the only one who ever understood what he was trapped in. Now go back to Season 1, Episode 10. That council member says, "Of all the Ricks in the central finite curve, you are the malcontent." At the time, it sounds like an insult, like a complaint about Rick being difficult and uncooperative. With the full context of everything revealed in Season 5, it means something completely different. The other Ricks built the Citadel together, agreed to the rules together, benefited from the system together. Rick C-137 helped design the entire thing and then abandoned it. He was the one Rick in the whole curve who was not satisfied with what the curve provided. Every other Rick was content to live inside the wall they had built around infinity. The main Rick could not do it. The show called him a malcontent in Season 1 and spent 4 more seasons showing you why that was true and what it cost him. What makes this genuinely remarkable as a piece of hidden storytelling is the patience it required. The writers introduced a term in Season 1 that meant almost nothing to the audience at the time. They let it sit. They occasionally referenced it in passing, just enough to keep it alive in the background, not enough to make it feel like a setup. And then, 5 seasons later, they used it as the foundation for the most important plot development in the show's history. The entire Evil Morty arc, the entire Citadel storyline, the entire question of what Rick's relationship to the other Ricks actually means. All of it lands on 3 words spoken in a single scene in Season 1 that most people forgot within minutes of hearing them. That is not an accident. That is a writing team that trusted their audience to either catch the detail or be rewarded for missing it. Either way, the show won. If you caught it, you spent 4 seasons quietly knowing something was coming. If you missed it, the Season 5 reveal hit you completely fresh. The central finite curve worked on both kinds of viewers at the same time. There is one more piece of this that does not get enough attention. The fan theory community spent years after the Season 5 finale debating whether the curve was Rick's idea from the beginning or something the other Ricks developed together. The evidence in the show points clearly toward Rick C-137 being the original designer. Evil Morty needed his brain specifically, and no other brain in the entire Citadel would do. But the show never said it outright. It just showed you that Evil Morty went to one Rick for the schematics and got what he needed. You are supposed to understand what that implies without being told. The show does this constantly. It treats its audience like people who are paying attention, and it rewards that attention with information that is technically never confirmed, but completely clear if you are watching carefully. The central finite curve is the biggest version of that pattern in the entire series. A concept introduced casually in Season 1, developed in hints across several seasons, and finally exploded into a revelation that changed everything about what the show had always been doing. Rick built a room inside infinity where he would always win. Then he decided the room was not enough and left it behind. That is the most Rick thing the show has ever revealed about him. More than any individual episode, more than any single speech or breakdown, he created the perfect system for himself and could not stand to live in it. The second that lands, Season 1 stops looking like a sci-fi comedy about a drunk genius going on wild adventures. It starts looking like something else entirely. A document of a man who has already decided that safety is not the same as meaning, even when he built the safety himself. The Season 1 name drop of the central finite curve was not background noise. It was the show telling you its biggest secret in plain language, quietly, in a scene that was officially about something else, trusting that most people would not hear it until it was too late to see it coming. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, which means the curve was always there. Just like Rick's most famous catchphrase, which turned out to be a message hiding in plain sound, spoken out loud in every room at every party, that nobody who heard it understood at all. Section 3. Wubba Lubba Dub Dub is a cry for help, and it was improvised by accident. There is a joke inside Rick and Morty that the entire world heard and nobody understood. It was said out loud, repeatedly, in living rooms and bedrooms and school hallways and convention floors, printed on t-shirts, tattooed chewed on arms, yelled at Justin Roiland from across parking lots by fans who wanted him to know they loved his show. The phrase became one of the most recognized things to come out of any animated television series in the last 20 years. People who had never seen a single episode of Rick and Morty knew the phrase. It was everywhere, and the entire time it was someone screaming for help in a language nobody spoke. To understand how this happened, you have to start at the very beginning of the phrase itself, before it meant anything, before it was famous, before it was even finished being thought of. The story of how Wubba Lubba Dub Dub was born is not a story about careful writing or deliberate meaning. It is a story about an accident that happened in a recording booth that turned into something neither of its creators saw coming or particularly wanted. The original plan for that moment in Season 1, Episode 5, the episode called Me Seeks and Destroy, was different. Rick was not supposed to say Wubba Lubba Dub Dub at all. The original joke was that Rick would do something called the Curly Spin, a reference to the Three Stooges, where the character Curly would run in circles while lying on the ground and make a specific whooping sound. That was the bit. Rick would do a version of that physical comedy gag, played for absurdity, and the scene would move on. When it came time to actually record the line, Justin Roiland decided to do something different. He improvised. Instead of the Stooges reference, he riffed off another sound he had in his head, the audience whooping from the Arsenio Hall show, a late-night talk show famous for its crowd noise. Rick, in the episode, even credits Arsenio Hall directly. He says the phrase is his new catchphrase, and that it is based on Arsenio's thing. The fact that Rick gets the sound slightly wrong, Wubba Lubba Dub Dub instead of whatever exact sound Arsenio's audience made, is itself the joke. Rick is doing an impression that does not quite work and presenting it with total confidence anyway. So the phrase was an improvised riff on a talk show reference, replacing a planned Three Stooges gag that came out of a single recording session as a one-time thing. Neither Harmon nor Roiland thought it was going to stick. By their own account, they were worried it was too stupid. They were making fun of the very idea of cartoon catchphrases, the kind of meaningless, loud phrase that shows slap-on merchandise and repeat until audiences are conditioned to cheer for it. Wubba Lubba Dub Dub was supposed to be a joke about catchphrases being dumb. It was not supposed to become one. Then it became one, immediately and completely. The fan base picked it up before Season 1 was even finished. It was everywhere online within weeks. The writers watched this happen with a mixture of amusement and genuine discomfort. Roiland has said in interviews that he grew sick of the phrase faster than almost anything else about the show, partly because he had already recorded it dozens of times, and partly because hearing it shouted back at him by strangers removed whatever irony had been baked into the original joke. The phrase was meant to be a parody of the thing it became. Once it became the thing, the parody collapsed. But here is where the story stops being funny and starts being something else. The writers decided to respond to the phrase's popularity not by ignoring it or letting it fade, but by doing something unusual. They reached into the show's own world and gave the phrase a translation. In Season 1, Episode 11, the episode called Ricksy Business, Rick says Wubba Lubba Dub Dub multiple times across the episode, at a party, during a serious conversation, at completely random moments. It fits the pattern the show had already established. Rick says it when he is happy. Rick says it when he is joking around. Rick says it like a person who has decided this is who they are now. And then Bird Person pulls Morty aside. Bird Person is one of the few characters in the show who has known Rick for a very long time. He fought alongside Rick in a resistance movement against the Galactic Federation before the events of the show begin. He knows Rick in a way that almost nobody else does. Not the version of Rick the audience sees performing confidence and chaos, but the version of Rick that existed before all of that. When Bird Person speaks about Rick, he tends to be more honest than anyone else in the show about what Rick actually is. He asks Morty what he thinks Wubba Lubba Dub Dub means. Morty says what the audience is thinking. He calls it Rick's stupid nonsense catchphrase, something Rick says when he is messing around, when he is in a good mood, when he wants to make a scene feel lighter. Bird Person corrects him. He says that in the language of his people, the bird people, the phrase translates directly to, "I am in great pain, please help me." That is the full translation, word for word. I am in great pain, please help me. The phrase that fans were putting on merchandise, that people were shouting across convention floors, that had become the signature sound of a show famous for being irreverent and fun, it was a distress call, a request for rescue, spoken by a man at parties, during jokes, while laughing, while doing the things that people do when they are performing being fine. Morty's response to this is important. He does not collapse. He does not take a long pause. He says almost immediately that he has got news for Bird Person. Rick is saying it ironically. He is making fun of the phrase itself. It does not mean what it sounds like. Bird Person does not argue. He does not confirm or deny. He just lets the information sit there. The show does not tell you who is right. It just puts both possibilities in the same scene and walks away. Either Rick has been saying something in a language he does not know, which happens to translate to the single most honest description of his internal state that the show ever produces, or Rick knows exactly what the phrase means in Bird Person's language, and he has been saying it loudly at every party, in every crowd, surrounded by people who do not speak bird people, as the safest possible confession. A truth delivered in a code nobody around him can read. Neither option makes the phrase funny anymore. What makes this piece of hidden lore so precise is that it works on every level of the show simultaneously. On the surface, Wubba Lubba Dub Dub is a joke about catchphrases and how stupid catchphrases are. One level down, it is a translation that reframes everything Rick does in Season 1 as a performance covering something much darker. One level further down, it is a question the show refuses to answer. Does Rick know what he is saying? And beneath all of that, it is an accident. A line that was improvised in a recording booth to replace a Three Stooges reference that became the most famous thing about the show, that the writers then pulled back toward meaning as if it had always been pointing there. The accident became the confession, and the confession was hidden inside the accident. There is a real-world echo of this that is almost too neat to believe. For a period of time, if you typed Wubba Lubba Dub Dub into Google, the search engine would respond by asking if you meant, "I am in great pain, please help me." It treated the phrase as a direct translation. Google's own system absorbed the show's internal language and reflected it back at anyone who searched. So people who typed in the catchphrase as a celebration, as a joke, as a way of expressing enthusiasm, the machine answered them with a cry for help. That detail did not come from the writers. It was not planned by the show. It happened because the show's mythology had become real enough to filter into the systems people use every day without thinking about them. The phrase escaped the screen and then got translated by the world itself. Now think about what this does to seasons 2 and 3 and every season after, knowing what the phrase means. Every time Rick says it going forward, the show is doing something strange and precise. It is putting a distress signal into a comedy moment and trusting that the audience either remembers or has forgotten the Bird Person scene. If you remember, every usage of the phrase is Rick performing happiness loudly enough that the sadness underneath cannot be heard. If you have forgotten, the phrase is just a funny sound a cartoon character makes. The show does not remind you. It does not put a subtitle on screen. It does not have another character bring it up again. Bird Person tells Morty the translation in one scene in one episode, and then the show moves on and keeps using the phrase exactly as it always did, trusting that the audience is carrying that information or is not, and that both experiences of the phrase are valid, but only one of them is honest. Roiland has said he is sick of the phrase, that he has heard it too many times, recorded it too many times, had it yelled at him too many times. What is interesting about that is what it accidentally rhymes with. A man who is tired of performing a thing he never meant to make famous. A character who says something that means, "I am in great pain, please help me," over and over, at every party, in every crowd, forever. The performer and the character he plays have ended up in the same place by completely different roads. The catchphrase was an accident. The translation was a choice. The way those two things sit next to each other and refuse to be separated is one of the most quietly devastating things the show has ever done. And it did it in a phrase that most of the audience was too busy repeating to examine. Every time someone says Wubba Lubba Dub Dub and means it as a celebration, they are saying, "I am in great pain, please help me," in a language they do not know they are speaking. The show built that into the fabric of its own culture and then stepped back and let it run. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And just in case you thought that was the deepest hidden detail the show ever slipped past its audience without comment, there is an entire episode whose opening lasts 2 minutes, set 2 episodes before another episode, containing a visual detail so small and so deliberate that the writers confirmed it exists, but most people who have watched the show multiple times have still never seen it. Section 4. The parasite eggs were there 2 episodes before Total Rickall. Most television shows hide things in plain sight as a trick. They put a detail somewhere they know the audience will not look, and then later they reveal it and say, "Look, it was there the whole time. Did you see it?" It feels clever. It is designed to feel clever. The detail was placed specifically so that someone would eventually point to it. What the writers of Rick Rick and Morty did 2 episodes before Total Rickall is different. It is not a trick. It is not a wink at the camera. It is a genuinely small, genuinely easy to miss visual detail that requires you to pause a specific moment in one episode, know what you are looking for, and then go back to a different episode to confirm what you think you saw. Justin Roiland himself confirmed it exists and said he did not think too many people had caught it. He was right. Most people who have watched both episodes back to back multiple times in full have still never noticed it. Here is the setup. Total Rickall is Season 2, Episode 4. It is the episode where the Smith family home gets invaded by alien parasites that reproduce by planting fake memories inside people's heads. The parasites create fictional characters, Uncle Steve, Cousin Nicky, Mr. Beauregard the butler, and dozens more, by making the family believe they have always known these people. The characters seem real because the memories seem real. The family cannot tell who is genuine and who was invented 5 minutes ago by a creature that feeds on trust. The question the episode never answers directly is, how did the parasites get into the house in the first place? Rick mentions at the start of the episode that the parasites are present. He shoots one of them immediately, someone pretending to be Jerry's brother Uncle Steve, and explains to the family what is happening. He seals the house. The story begins. But the origin of the infestation, how these creatures got past Rick, how they ended up in the home of the smartest being in his section of the multiverse, how they breached a house belonging to a man who has defenses against things most civilizations have never imagined, is treated as background information. The audience is expected to accept that the parasites are there and move on. Roiland confirmed that the explanation is sitting in the episode that aired 2 weeks earlier. Morty Night Run is Season 2, Episode 2. At the end of that episode, Rick is loading rocks into the back of his spaceship. They are ordinary-looking rocks, the kind of background detail that registers as set dressing and nothing more. You are not supposed to be examining rocks at the end of an episode. You are supposed to be paying attention to the characters and what they are saying and what just happened in the story. If you pause the right moment in Morty Night Run and look closely at the rocks Rick is loading into his ship, you can see a pink blob attached to one of them. Small, easy to miss. The kind of thing that looks like a smudge or an animation detail that does not mean anything. It is a parasite pod. Then the next time you see those exact same rocks is at the very beginning of Total Rickall. Rick is throwing them away, discarding them outside the house. And if you look at those rocks in Total Rickall, the pink blobs have multiplied. What was one small pod in Morty Night Run has become a cluster. They grew during the trip home. By the time Rick threw the rocks away in his own backyard, the infestation was already beginning. Rick Sanchez, the man who can outwit entire civilizations, who has survived situations that should have been impossible, who is, by his own design, the most prepared person in any room, he accidentally brought the parasites home himself. He picked up rocks on an alien planet without checking them carefully enough. He carried them in his ship for the duration of an entire episode. He discarded them in his own yard. And then 2 episodes later, his family was fighting for their lives against creatures that had colonized their memories. The detail is not just funny. It is actually very important to how the episode works. One of the ongoing questions about Total Rickall is whether it takes place in the same dimension as the other episodes, whether it is the same Rick and Morty the audience always follows, or whether it is a different version of the family from a parallel universe. This question comes up because of another character in the episode, one whose presence is harder to explain, which will come up shortly. But the rock detail is part of the argument that yes, this is the same Rick, because the same Rick who loaded those rocks onto his ship in Morty Night Run is the same Rick who dumped them in his yard at the start of Total Rickall. The through line is there, visible, confirmed by one of the creators. The same stupid mistake produced both moments. That is genuinely funny in a specific way. The show spends a lot of time establishing that Rick is extraordinary. He is the smartest person in his slice of the universe. He built technology that no civilization has matched. He has escaped situations that should have killed him hundreds of times. And the most dangerous thing that ever happened to his family in a domestic setting, an invasion that nearly destroyed their ability to know what was real, happened because he did not check his rocks carefully enough before he brought them home. Genius is not the same as careful. The show knows this and uses it here without ever saying it out loud. Now, the parasite detail is remarkable on its own, but it is not the most interesting hidden thing in Total Rickall. That belongs to Mr. Poopy Butthole. Mr. Poopy Butthole appears at the very beginning of Total Rickall, as though he has always been part of the show. He is small, yellow, cheerful, and apparently a longtime friend of the Smith family. He joins the family in trying to figure out which of the new characters appearing in their house are real and which are fake parasite creations. He has memories with the family. He fits right in. The show presents him as obviously established, obviously familiar familiar, obviously someone the audience should already know. The audience did not know him. He had never appeared in the show before that episode. This is the trick the episode plays on its own viewers in a way that mirrors what the parasites do to the Smith family. Just as the parasites make the family believe they have always known people they just met, the episode makes the audience believe they have always known Mr. Poopy Butthole by presenting him with complete confidence as an established character. In the opening credits of Total Rickall, he has been edited into the usual title sequence, inserted into scenes as though he was there all along. The show forged his history before the episode even started. At the end of the episode, the family resolves the parasite problem by realizing that the fake characters can only create happy memories. Every parasite character, when the family thinks back, has only good times attached to them. So Beth decides to shoot anyone she cannot remember having a bad experience with. She works through the remaining characters. She gets to Mr. Poopy Butthole. She shoots him. He is not a parasite. He bleeds real blood. He collapses in real pain. He survives barely, and the family watches in horror as Beth realizes she has shot someone who was genuinely their friend. The episode ends with Mr. Poopy Butthole recovering in a hospital, bitter and hurt, while Beth sits at home drinking heavily and dealing with what she did. But here is what the episode does not explain. Where did Mr. Poopy Butthole come from? Why has he never appeared before? How is he a real, established friend of the family if the audience has never seen him? Dan Harmon gave an answer in an interview, and it is one of the strangest and most interesting explanations a television creator has ever offered for one of their own characters. He said that Mr. Poopy Butthole might be a different kind of creature entirely. Not one of the harmful parasites, but a separate species that shows up wherever those parasites appear. He described it like this: just as where there are flies, there are spiders, wherever the memory parasites start appearing, Mr. Poopy Butthole shows up too. He is a different species, more advanced, more harmless. He survives by sliding into the gaps that the parasites leave in people's memories, the holes where the fake memories were planted, and filling those holes with himself. Harmon went further. He said Mr. Poopy Butthole is not bound by normal space or time the way regular characters are. He described him as a kind of creature that only appears where reality is already breaking down, where memory and perception are already being twisted. He exists in those distortions. He takes advantage of them not to harm anyone, but simply to exist somewhere he can be accepted. And then Harmon said the thing that makes Mr. Poopy Butthole genuinely strange. He said that the same ability that allows Mr. Poopy Butthole to slip into gaps in memory and perception is the same ability that allows him to break the fourth wall and speak directly to the audience. He is not bound by the rules of the show the same way other characters are. He can see outside it in a way that only Rick can also do. And the reason, according to Harmon, is that he exists in a space between things, between memories, between timelines, between what is real and what has been invented by creatures feeding on trust. Rick can break the fourth wall because he is the smartest being in his section of the universe and seems to have some awareness of the larger reality around him. Mr. Poopy Butthole can break the fourth wall because he lives in the cracks between realities and is therefore closer to the edge of the show's world than almost any other character. That is Harmon's theory about his own character. He offered it as a possibility, not a confirmed fact. The show itself never explains Mr. Poopy Butthole's origin on screen. The comics gave him a different backstory, a home planet, a celebrity life he gave up to live quietly on Earth with the Smith family. But Harmon's version, the one where Mr. Poopy Butthole is a fourth-dimensional creature that feeds on the wreckage of parasite invasions and exists at the edges of reality, is arguably more interesting than anything the show has ever done with the character directly. What connects all of this is a single episode that works on 3 different hidden levels at once. There is the level most viewers never find, the parasite pods on the rocks in Morty Night Run. There is the level most viewers find eventually, the fake history the show constructed for Mr. Poopy Butthole in the opening credits. And there's the level almost nobody thinks about, the question of what Mr. Poopy Butthole actually is, answered not in the episode, but in an interview, in a theory offered by the man who helped create him. That makes the character far stranger and more precise than he appears. The show hid the beginning of its most chaotic episode in the ending of a previous one. It faked a character's history so convincingly that the audience felt the same confusion as the characters being invaded, and it left the explanation of its most mysterious recurring figure to a creator interview that most fans have never read. 3 layers of hidden information, 1 episode, and at the center of all of it, a small yellow creature that can look directly at you through the screen because he lives in the space between what is real and what someone made up, and he has decided that space is comfortable comfortable enough to call home. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the parasites in Total Rickall work by making you believe something was always there when it was not. The Dan Harmon story circle works by making every episode feel like it arrived naturally when it was actually built on a very specific, very deliberate structure. And one episode of Rick and Morty made that structure the literal setting of its own story, in a way that only makes complete sense once you know what you are looking at. Section 5. Dan Harmon made the story circle an episode, and nobody noticed. Every episode of Rick and Morty feels like it goes somewhere. Not just in terms of plot, in terms of shape. There is something underneath the chaos and the jokes and the violence and the crying that makes each episode feel complete in a way that is hard to name. You finish an episode and something has closed. Something that was open at the beginning is now shut. The character who started the story is not quite the same person who ended it, even if everything looks the same on the surface. The show does this so consistently and so quietly that most viewers never ask how. The answer is a circle, a literal circle drawn on paper divided into 8 pieces. Dan Harmon has been using it to write stories since before Rick and Morty existed, and in season 4, he put it inside the show itself, made it the setting of an entire episode, and let it run as both a story and a diagram of how the story was built, at the same time in the same 20 minutes, without ever stopping to explain what he had done. Most people who watched that episode thought it was a weird, hard-to-follow anthology episode. They were not wrong. It is also one of the most openly honest things a television writer has ever done about how their own mind works. Here is where the story circle comes from. Harmon developed it in the late 1990s when he was running a short film event called Channel 101, where filmmakers had to tell complete stories in under 5 minutes. He needed a tool that could help people build a full arc in an extremely short amount of time. He went back to older ideas about how stories work, particularly the work of a writer named Joseph Campbell, who spent his career studying myths and legends from cultures all over the world, and found that almost all of them followed the same basic shape. Hero leaves home, hero faces challenges, hero finds what they were looking for, hero pays a price, hero returns changed. Harmon simplified this into 8 steps, and arranged them in a circle because the character always ends up back where they started, just different. The 8 steps are: a character exists in their normal world, they want something, they go somewhere new to find it, they search for it, they find it, they pay a price for finding it, they return to where they started, and they have changed because of everything that happened. That is it. 8 steps. A circle. Every episode of Rick and Morty, and before that, every episode of Community, and before that, every short film from Channel 101, runs on this structure. The circle does not make stories feel the same. That is the thing people misunderstand about it. Having a structure does not mean every story produces the same result, any more than every house built on a foundation looks the same. The structure is invisible. What sits on top of it, the characters, the specific journey, the specific price, the specific change, is where the show lives. The circle just makes sure the building stands up. Harmon has demonstrated how it works using actual Rick and Morty episodes. The episode Morty Night Run from season 2 is the one he has broken down most clearly. Morty starts in his normal situation, in a spaceship with Rick, uncomfortable with Rick's behavior, wanting to do the right thing. He crosses into unfamiliar territory by stealing Rick's keys and chasing after an assassin. He finds what he was looking for, a creature named Fart that he believes is innocent and worth saving. He pays a price. The cost of protecting Fart turns out to be enormous, and Morty has to do something he started the episode believing he would never do. He kills Fart. He returns to Rick. He is different from the person who started the episode because he now knows that absolute morality, the belief that killing is always wrong no matter what, cannot survive contact with a universe as complicated as the one he lives in. 8 steps. A circle. The episode is a complete arc for Morty that changes something real about who he is. Jerry's story in the same episode runs on its own smaller circle alongside Morty's. Jerry is dropped off at a place called Jerry Baree, a kind of daycare specifically for Jerrys from different dimensions, while Rick and Morty go on their adventure. He starts uncomfortable. He finds community with other versions of himself. He discovers he actually likes being around people who understand him without judgment. He returns at the end of the episode, having learned something about his own worth. His circle is smaller and funnier than Morty's, but it follows the same shape. 2 circles running inside one episode, both complete, both doing different things with the same structure. Harmon has described the circle as his attempt to remove all the hard and repeated work from building a story. Once you know the 8 steps, you do not have to reinvent the process every time. You know where the character needs to go. You know what questions to ask. You know that if your character finds what they wanted in step 5, something has to cost them in step 6, or the story will not feel like it earned its ending. This is background information on how the show works. Most viewers do not know it and do not need to know it, but then Season 4, Episode 6 arrived, and Harmon put the circle inside the show. The episode is called Never Ricking Morty. Rick and Morty are on a train, called the Story Train, that travels in a continuous circle through a series of stories. Each story is a short scene that cuts to another short scene, none of them clearly connected, all of them feeling slightly off, like someone is generating narratives rather than living through them. At a certain point in the episode, Rick pulls out a diagram of the train to show Morty how it works. The diagram is a circle divided into 8 segments. Not 4 segments, not 12, 8, the exact number that Harmon uses in his story circle. The diagram in the episode is the story circle, drawn on paper, held up by the character living inside the episode, built using that same structure. The story train in the episode works the same way the real story circle works. It generates stories automatically. It keeps moving. It cannot stop because it is circular. There is no endpoint, only the next beginning. The villain of the episode is a character called Story Lord, who uses the train and the stories it generates as a source of power. Rick and Morty have to navigate through the generated stories to reach the engine of the train and stop it. Here is the part that is almost too layered to follow the first time. The episode itself is built using the story circle. Rick and Morty start in a normal situation. They want to escape the train. They travel through the stories being generated. They find what they need to solve the problem. They pay a price. They return to something like normal. They are changed slightly. Rick specifically, who ends the episode with a small but real moment that means something about his character. The episode uses the structure it is making fun of while making fun of it, while also being a genuine story that works because of that structure. That is 3 things happening at once. A parody of narrative structure, a working example of that same narrative structure, and a diagram of the structure, shown inside the episode, made out of the episode's own setting. Harmon has spent his entire career being obsessed with how stories work, where they come from, and why certain shapes of story feel satisfying while others fall flat. He has said publicly that storytelling feels to him like a biological process, something humans do because they need to, the same way they breathe or eat. The circle is his way of honoring that need while also making it manageable, making it something you can point to, draw, divide into 8 pieces, and use as a map. Never Ricking Morty is what happens when that obsession turns inward so completely that the map becomes the territory. The episode is not just about storytelling, it is made of storytelling, in the most literal, visual sense possible, with a diagram drawn by the character who represents the creator's own point of view, Rick, the smartest person in any room, the one who understands how systems work, explaining to another character how the trap they are in is the same trap every story puts you in. Rick tells Morty that the train generates story potential, that it takes what could happen and turns it into what is happening, endlessly, without stopping. Rick uses the circle diagram to plan their escape. He walks Morty through the 8 segments. In doing so, he walks the audience through the 8 segments of the very episode they are watching. The escape plan and the episode structure are the same thing. What makes this genuinely remarkable rather than just clever is that it works even if you have no idea the story circle exists. The episode is confusing and deliberately strange on a first watch, but it functions as a complete Rick and Morty episode regardless. Rick and Morty face a problem, navigate it, resolve it, and end up somewhere slightly different from where they started. The episode delivers that in its normal way. The meta layer, the one where the episode is a diagram of itself, is completely optional. You can watch Never Ricking Morty as a weird anthology episode and have a full experience. You can watch it as a dissection of how stories are built and have a completely different full experience. The same 20 minutes contain both, stacked on top of each other, with the circle connecting them. Very few television episodes have ever done this. The number of shows willing to make their own writing process the subject of an episode is small. The number willing to do it in a way that still works as a normal episode if you ignore the meta layer is smaller. The number that hid the actual diagram of that writing process inside the episode as a piece of in-world set design, visible to the audience but never explained to them, that number is effectively 1. Harmon put his map inside the story. The map had 8 pieces. The story had 8 steps. The character held up the map to plan an escape from a circular train that could not stop moving. Everything in Rick and Morty moves in a circle, always has. Harmon just decided that one episode was going to show you the circle while you were inside it, and trust that most people would feel the shape even if they never saw the drawing. They did feel it. They just could not name what they were feeling. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which brings up the question of what happens when a character who knows they are inside a story, a character who can look at the structure of the world they live in and understand exactly how it works, has been living inside a plan that was set in motion long before the first episode of the show. show. A plan so long and so patient that it required a character to disappear, reappear, get elected president, and destroy the most powerful structure in the known multiverse before anyone understood what they had been watching. Section 6. Tammy was a spy. From the first episode she appeared in, there's a kind of storytelling that only works if the audience does not know it is happening. You cannot foreshadow a betrayal by pointing at it. You cannot build a long con by announcing the con. The whole mechanism depends on the audience watching the right things for the wrong reasons, paying attention to the details that matter while believing they are paying attention to details that do not. When it works perfectly, the reveal does not feel like a surprise. It feels like remembering something you always knew but somehow forgot to understand. Rick and Morty pulled this off across 2 full seasons of television with a character most people treated as a background figure. A teenage girl with brown hair who showed up in the crowd, made a few jokes, dated someone important, and then destroyed everything at a wedding reception with a laser rifle and zero hesitation. Her name was Tammy. She was a Galactic Federation spy. She had been one from the moment she first appeared on screen. To understand how deep this goes, you have to start at the very beginning of her presence in the show. Not the wedding, not the relationship with Bird Person, the actual first moment Tammy exists in the world of Rick and Morty. Season 1, Episode 5, Meeseeks and Destroy. Summer has used the Meeseeks box, one of Rick's devices, to summon a Mr. Meeseeks and ask it to make her more popular at school. The Meeseeks succeeds. In the school assembly that follows, where the Meeseeks presents Summer as the new social standard to her classmates, the camera shows a crowd of students gathering around her. Tammy is in that crowd. She is not introduced, she is not named. She is just a face in a group of teenagers who are suddenly interested in Summer Smith. That is her first appearance in the entire show. One face in a crowd, Season 1, Episode 5. Now here is what that detail means once you know what Tammy actually is. The theory, one that is supported thoroughly by the timeline of the show, is that the Galactic Federation traced Rick's movements to Morty's school in the very first episode. In the pilot, Rick and Morty cause a scene at a Federation customs checkpoint in space. Rick uses his portal gun to escape, and the portal drops them directly into the cafeteria of Morty's school. The Federation knows what happened. They know Rick Sanchez, one of the most wanted criminals in their system, used a portal that landed in a specific school at a specific address. They cannot catch him immediately. He is already gone. But they know the school matters to him. His grandchildren go there. He will be near it. So they plant someone. Tammy enrolls at Harry Herpson High School as a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation. Her mission is not to arrest Rick immediately. That would be nearly impossible and would tip him off. Her mission is to get close, to embed herself in the social circle around Rick's family, to gather information, build relationships, and wait for an opportunity that would allow the Federation to strike at multiple targets simultaneously, rather than just Rick alone. She starts with Summer, the easiest entry point. If she is Summer's friend, she has a reason to be around the Smith house, around Rick, around the people Rick cares about. The Meeseeks assembly gives her the perfect opening. Summer is suddenly popular. Tammy becomes one of the people in Summer's new social circle. It is natural. It is unforced. It raises no alarms because there is no reason for anyone to look at a teenage girl making friends with another teenage girl and see a conspiracy. This is what long-term planning looks like when it is executed well. Tammy did not rush. She did not immediately try to get close to Rick or to Bird Person. She spent Season 1 being exactly what she appeared to be, a normal high school friend of Summer's, present at parties, present in the background of scenes, building a history that would make her presence feel permanent and unremarkable. She appears briefly in Rick Potion number 9. She is at the big party in the Season 1 finale, Rixie Business. Every appearance is casual. Every appearance is exactly what you would expect from a regular teenager. At that Season 1 finale party, something important happens. Bird Person is there. Rick's oldest and closest friend, a veteran of wars fought against the Galactic Federation, someone the Federation would very much like to locate and neutralize. Tammy meets him. She is clearly interested in him. He is interested in her. The show plays this as a funny background detail, a large bird alien getting along with a teenage human girl. Comedically awkward, sweet in a strange way. From Tammy's perspective, she just found a faster route to her target than Summer ever provided. Bird Person is not just connected to Rick, he is wanted by the Federation in his own right. Getting close to Bird Person means getting access to the entire network of Rick's allies. Squanchy, the Resistance fighters, everyone who fought alongside Rick and Bird Person against the Federation's rule. One relationship, if built carefully enough, could bring them all into a single location at a single single moment. She built it carefully enough. Season 2 shows Tammy and Bird Person's relationship developing. She appears at his home in Get Swifty, comfortable and settled, wearing his robe, living there. The show plays this as a running background joke. Bird Person fell hard for a human girl. Their relationship is strange and genuine and a little funny. Morty finds it uncomfortable. Rick seems mildly amused. Nobody looks at Tammy and sees anything other than exactly what she is presenting herself as, a young woman who genuinely fell for someone unexpected. Then comes the Season 2 finale, The Wedding Squanchers. Bird Person and Tammy are getting married. The entire Smith family is invited. Rick comes, reluctantly, and gives a speech at the reception about Bird Person that is one of the most honest things Rick says across the first 2 seasons of the show. A genuine expression of how much Bird Person means to him, delivered awkwardly and briefly because Rick cannot sustain vulnerability for long without covering it with something else. And then Tammy stands up during the reception and speaks. She tells everyone that she is a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation. She says that everyone present is under arrest, and then she turns to Bird Person, the man she just married, the man whose home she lived in, the man she has spent over a season convincing the audience and everyone around her that she genuinely loved, and she shoots him multiple times with a laser rifle, while he is still looking at her with an expression that is not yet understood what is happening. The Federation troops move in. Rick escapes with his family. Squanchy holds off the attackers so they can run. Bird Person is left behind, shot multiple times, presumed dead by Rick and the audience for the entirety of Season 3. He was not dead. He was recovered by Tammy and the Federation and rebuilt as a weapon, turned into a cyborg called Phoenix Person, his mind wiped, his body remade into a soldier designed to fight against the people who had been his closest friends. Bird Person's love for Tammy was used to destroy him, and then rebuild him as something Rick would have to fight. Everything about Tammy's long con ended in the worst possible outcome for the people she had surrounded herself with. Now go back to Season 1, Episode 5, The Crowd Shot. The face in the group of teenagers gathering around Summer after the Meeseeks assembly. Tammy is already there, already working, already embedding herself in the life of a family she will eventually help take apart. The show never draws attention to this. There is no episode where a character says Tammy has been a spy since the beginning. There is no flashback showing the Federation planning her assignment. The audience is given all the information they need: her first appearance, the timeline of the pilot, the Federation's reach and resources, and trusted to assemble the picture themselves, either during the show or after the wedding reveal, when the shape of everything that came before suddenly changes. What makes this particularly impressive as a piece of long-term storytelling is that Tammy's plan actually worked. Most long cons in television fail in the end. The spy is caught, the cover is blown prematurely, the hero figures it out before the damage is done. Tammy's cover was never blown until she chose to blow it herself, at the exact moment that served her mission best. She executed a multi-season infiltration with complete success and walked away from the wedding, injured but alive, with the Federation's objectives achieved. Bird Person was captured. Rick was eventually forced to turn himself in to protect his family. The Galactic Federation took control of Earth. She won. For a full season, she won completely. The show also confirmed that Tammy's parents, Pat and Donna Giederman, who attended the wedding and chatted pleasantly with Beth and Jerry before the reception speech, were cyborgs and Federation agents themselves. The entire family she presented as her background was a constructed cover. The parents, who made her seem like a regular human teenager with regular human origins, were machines built to make her story feel real. Every layer of Tammy's life that touched the Smith family was engineered. That level of detail, going back and making the parents part of the operation too, making even the mundane family small talk at the wedding reception part of the Federation's infrastructure, is the show doing something that most television never bothers to do. It is making the conspiracy complete. Not just the spy, but the spy's entire supporting structure. Not just the lie, but every piece of scenery that held the lie up. Tammy first appeared in Season 1, Episode 5, as a face in a crowd. She was already a Federation agent. She spent 2 seasons building a cover, developing a relationship, earning trust, and waiting. She ended it in a single speech at a wedding that destroyed Rick's closest friendship and set the entire Season 3 arc in motion. The show put all of this together across 2 seasons without ever confirming it, without ever having a character notice the pattern, without ever breaking the surface of what Tammy appeared to be until the moment she chose to break it herself. That is the real long con. Not Tammy's plan inside the show's plan for the audience. Letting them watch the setup for 2 seasons without knowing they were watching a setup, and then revealing the shape of it all all at once in a wedding reception, in a Season 2 finale that changed everything that came before it. There is a box in Rick's garage, shown briefly in an early episode, with the words time travel stuff written on the outside. Rick has said clearly that he does not do time travel and does not believe in it as a solution to problems. And yet the box is there, labeled, sitting in the background of scenes that the audience walks past without stopping. The show has never explained what is in it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Some things are hidden in plain sight because the show wants you to find them. Some things are hidden in plain sight because the show wants you to walk past them until the right moment arrives. Section 7. Rick and Morty were originally supposed to be the same person, and a Reddit fan forced the ending to change. Section 1 of this essay introduced the fact that a fan on Reddit figured out the show's biggest secret and forced Dan Harmon to change the direction of the entire series. That is the headline version of the story, but the full version is longer and stranger and more interesting than the headline, and it deserves its own space because what it reveals about the show is not just trivia. It is the key to understanding why Rick is written the way he is, why certain things about his character never quite add up the way they should, and why the show that exists today is haunted by the ghost of a version of itself that never got to happen. Start with what the plan actually was. Harmon confirmed in a 2021 interview that the original intention for Rick and Morty was that the two main characters are the same person. Specifically, the idea was that Rick is a future version of Morty, not a metaphor, not a thematic parallel, literally the same individual, separated by time and experience, living in the same house, going on adventures together, with one of them knowing the truth and the other one completely unaware of it. Think about what that means structurally. Every adventure Rick takes Morty on would have been, in that version of the show, Rick engineering his own past. Every lesson Rick teaches Morty about the universe, about how to survive, about how to think under pressure, would have been Rick giving his younger self the exact experiences that turned him into Rick. Every time Rick looked at Morty with that combination of irritation and something that is almost tenderness, it would have been a man looking at who he used to be before everything went wrong. The tragedy built into that version of the show is enormous. Rick would know exactly what Morty is going to lose. He would know every bad decision Morty is going to make. He would know the specific shape of the suffering ahead of his younger self, and he would be unable to prevent any of it, because preventing it would mean preventing himself. If Morty does not go through the things that break him, Rick does not exist. The only way Rick can exist is if Morty suffers exactly as much as he did. So every adventure, every moment of danger, every time Rick puts Morty in a situation that nearly kills him or genuinely traumatizes him, it would all be Rick doing to his younger self what was done to him, not out of cruelty, out of necessity, because there is no other way. That is a brutal concept. It is also a deeply coherent one. It explains almost everything about Rick's behavior in the early seasons that otherwise feels contradictory. Why does Rick clearly love Morty in a way he cannot fully express or admit? Because Morty is him. Why does Rick push Morty so hard, expose him to things no child should see, refuse to protect him from the full reality of how terrible the universe can be? Because Rick went through those things, and they made him who he is. Why does Rick sometimes look at Morty like he is looking at something irreplaceable, even when his words say the opposite? Because he is. Morty is the only version of himself Rick has left from before everything was destroyed. The plan was to seed this across the show slowly. Small clues. Moments that looked like one thing and meant another. Details that would reward viewers who went back and re-watched knowing the truth. The writing team was building toward a reveal that would have recontextualized the entire series. A moment where the audience would realize that every single episode they had watched was simultaneously a comedy adventure show and a document of a man watching his own childhood play out in front of him and being powerless to change it. Then someone on Reddit posted a theory that described exactly this. Harmon saw the post. He read it. He recognized how precisely it matched what the writers had been building toward. And the problem with that recognition is that a secret the audience has already figured out is not a secret anymore. The slow reveal they had been planning, the one that was supposed to land after seasons of careful setup, the one that was going to make everything the audience had watched suddenly mean something completely different, would now arrive as confirmation of something people already knew, rather than as a revelation that changed everything. The impact would be gone. The moment they had been working toward would produce not a gasp, but a nod. Harmon pulled the story. He removed the Rick as future Morty arc from the plans for the show and decided to go in a different direction. He also decided to stay off Reddit from that point forward, because if one person had gotten that close that quickly, the comment sections of fan websites were now a genuine risk to the show's ability to surprise its audience. Here is where it gets genuinely complex. The direction the show went instead is the one that viewers know. Rick's backstory as as a man who had a family, lost them to violence at the hands of another Rick, and spent decades in grief and anger that hollowed him out into the person the audience meets in Season 1. That backstory was developed across multiple seasons, revealed in pieces, and finally given its fullest explanation in Season 5. It is a real and affecting story. Many people consider it the emotional spine of the entire series, but the original plan was not just replaced, it was partially absorbed. Because here is the thing about the Rick as future Morty concept. Even without the literal version of it being true, the show kept the emotional core of it. Rick and Morty still function as two halves of the same psychological portrait. Harmon himself described them on the Season 1 commentary as an accurate picture of someone with two sides pulling in different directions. The manic, driven, must-do-everything side, and the depressive, uncertain, why-bother side. Rick and Morty are not literally the same person in the show that exists, but they are still, in a very real sense, built to represent the same person split into two. The original concept did not disappear. It dissolved into the texture of the show. The literal version was abandoned. The emotional version stayed. Every time Rick and Morty's dynamic feels like something more than a grandparent and grandchild going on adventures, every time it feels like Rick is teaching Morty something about himself rather than about the universe, that is the ghost of the original plan still moving through the show, even though the plan was changed. There is also a very specific piece of in-show evidence that takes on new weight when you know what the original plan was. In Season 3, Rick constructs a fake memory of his own origin to fool the Galactic Federation's interrogation machine. In that fake memory, another Rick approaches a younger Rick and offers him the opportunity to abandon his family and travel the multiverse. The younger Rick refuses. He says he is happy where he is, so the other Rick kills his wife and daughter to take that happiness away from him. This memory is later described by Rick as fabricated, something he made up to hack the machine, rather than a real recollection. But then, the Season 5 finale confirms that the memory was mostly true. Rick did have a wife named Diane. She was killed. Young Beth was killed. A Rick was responsible. The fabricated memory was not entirely fabricated. It was closer to reality than Rick admitted. Now layer the original plan over that. If Rick was originally going to be a future Morty, if that was the actual architecture of the show, then the question of who killed Rick's family becomes even stranger. Because if Rick is Morty grown up, and another Rick killed Rick's family, then another Rick killed the family of someone who was once Morty, which means the violence that destroyed Rick's life is somehow connected back to the same universe, the same bloodline, the same loop of cause and effect that the original concept was built around. The show that exists does not make this explicit. It cannot, because the Rick as Morty plan was canceled. But the residue of that original structure is visible in how the pieces fit together. The show feels, at certain moments, like it was designed to be about something slightly different from what it became. Like certain elements are pointing toward a shape that the finished version of the show does not fully resolve because the resolution was removed before it could be built. A box in Rick's garage, labeled time travel stuff, appears in early episodes. Rick says repeatedly across the show that time travel is not something he believes in and not something he uses. The box is never opened. Its contents are never confirmed. The show has never explained why the label is there if the contents are not real, or what it would mean if they were. If Rick is not a future Morty, the box is probably a joke, or a prop, or a detail the writers put in the garage to make the space feel lived in and left there without meaning. If Rick was supposed to be a future Morty, the box is the most important thing in the garage. The show that was planned and the show that exists share the same sets, the same characters, the same history, but they are not quite the same show. One of them has an answer to the box. The other one has a joke. A fan on Reddit decided which version the audience was going to get without knowing they were making that decision by posting a theory in a comment section that the wrong person read at the wrong time. That fan still does not know. Harmon never named them. The Reddit post was never officially identified. Somewhere, a person who watches Rick and Morty, who probably loves the show, probably has opinions about their favorite episodes, probably knows the catchphrases and the lore and the character arcs, is living their life without knowing that they changed the direction of the series they love by thinking about it too carefully. The show they watch today is not the show they would have watched if they had kept their theory to themselves. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, Rick's history was changed by what someone figured out before it could be revealed. The history of the Citadel, the Council of Ricks, and the central finite curve was built by Rick himself and then quietly abandoned. But the piece of that history that makes everything else make sense, the specific role Rick C-137 played in constructing the prison that every other Rick and every Morty in the multiverse lived inside without knowing, knowing is the part the show hid most carefully of all. Section 8, Rick C-137. Built the Citadel, then abandoned it, and it's why evil Morty targets him specifically. There is a version of Rick Sanchez that most viewers of the show have never fully seen. Not the drunk genius stumbling through the garage, not the nihilist making jokes at the edge of the universe, not the broken man crying in a parking lot after a breakup with a hive mind. There is a version of Rick that existed before all of that. A version that was so angry, so focused, and so completely consumed by a single purpose that he did something no other being in the entire multiverse had ever done or has done since. He built a wall around infinity. Understanding why he did it, how he did it, and why he eventually walked away from it is the hidden backbone of the entire show. It is the context that makes evil Morty's plan in the season 5 finale make complete sense rather than feeling like a twist that came from nowhere. And it is the reason that of all the Ricks and all the dimensions inside the central finite curve, evil Morty came specifically for Rick C-137. Not the Council of Ricks, not the most powerful Rick on the Citadel, the main Rick, the one the audience has been following since the pilot, because he was the only one who had what evil Morty needed. Start at the beginning of Rick C-137's story. Not the show's beginning, his beginning. He had a life before the portal gun, a house, a wife named Diane, a daughter named Beth who was very young. He was already brilliant, the intelligence was always there, but he was not yet the person the audience knows. He had not yet built the devices that would make him the most dangerous individual in his section of the multiverse. He had not yet traveled across dimensions, or fought wars against galactic governments, or accumulated enemies across dozens of realities. He was, by most available evidence, genuinely happy in a way that he never manages to be again across the entire run of the show. Then another Rick found him. This other Rick, the one the show eventually identifies as Rick Prime, the Rick who originally came from Morty's home dimension, approached Rick C-137 with an offer. He wanted C-137 to build a portal gun and join him in traveling the multiverse. The pitch was the infinite freedom that the multiverse represents, the ability to go anywhere, be anything, exist without limits, without the smallness of a single life in a single reality tying you down. Rick C-137 said no. He was happy where he was. His family was enough. Rick Prime responded to this refusal by bombing Rick C-137's house and killing Diane and young Beth. The motivation, as far as the show makes it clear, seems to be that Rick Prime was offended by the refusal itself, by the idea that a version of himself could look at infinite possibility and choose a normal life instead. The exact reasoning behind the bombing is never fully explained. The act itself is confirmed across multiple seasons, shown in different pieces at different points, and treated by the show as the foundational wound that produced everything Rick C-137 eventually became. After losing his family, Rick C-137 did two things. He built his own portal gun, something he had refused to do when asked, and now did on his own terms, for his own reasons, and he began hunting Rick Prime across the multiverse. Every dimension, every reality, every version of the world that might contain the Rick who destroyed his life. He searched. He killed other Ricks who he suspected might be responsible, running genetic tests to identify the specific individual. He killed dozens of Ricks, possibly hundreds, across years of searching. None of them were the right one. The hunt eventually hollowed him out. He had started it with passion, with grief transformed into purpose. As the years passed and the right Rick never appeared, the passion became exhaustion, the purpose became habit, and the habit became something that looked more like despair than determination. He kept hunting because stopping would mean accepting that the search had failed, but he had already, somewhere in the middle of all that time and all that violence, stopped believing he would actually find the answer. During this period, the long stretch of hunting and failure, he encountered other Ricks across the multiverse. Some of them had similar histories. Some of them had found each other and formed loose alliances. Rick C-137, despite being the most extreme and isolated version of the type, eventually entered into a kind of agreement with a group of these Ricks. The agreement was a peace treaty of sorts, a recognition that fighting each other was less useful than cooperation, at least for certain purposes. Part of that cooperation became the Citadel of Ricks, a massive structure built in a pocket of space between dimensions, designed to be a home and a base and a society for every Rick and every Morty in the multiverse who wanted to be part of it. Rick C-137 helped design and build the Citadel. He was one of its founders. He was involved in the construction of the system that would eventually govern the relationship between thousands of versions of himself and thousands of versions of his grandson. And underneath the Citadel, the founders built something else. Something that was not announced to the Mortys who would eventually live there. Something that most of the Ricks who came later may not have fully understood the implications of. The central, finite curve. The machine built beneath the Citadel was designed to do something that sounds simple, but is genuinely enormous in its consequences. It separated the multiverse. On one side of the separation, every universe where Rick exists and is the smartest being alive. On the other side, everything else. Every universe where Rick is not the dominant force. Every universe where someone or something is smarter, stronger, or more capable than Rick Sanchez. The machine sealed the boundary between these two groups so completely that travel from one side to the other was effectively impossible with standard portal technology. The green portal fluid that every Rick used to travel, including Rick C-137, only opened doors within the sealed portion. The rest of the multiverse, the infinite expanse of realities where Rick is not the most powerful thing in the room, was cut off entirely. The show confirms, through the specific mechanics of Evil Morty's plan in the Season 5 finale, that Rick C-137 was the original designer of the curve. Evil Morty needed to scan Rick C-137's brain to get the schematics for how to break the boundary. Not any other Rick's brain, not the Citadel's central database, not the Council of Rick's records. The information existed specifically and only in Rick C-137's memory because he was the one who had designed it from scratch. Every other Rick in the Citadel knew how to use the system. Only C-137 knew how it was fundamentally built because he had been the one to build it. Which means that when Evil Morty spent seasons working toward his goal of escaping the curve, he always knew exactly whose brain he needed to break into. The plan was never about the Citadel in general. It was always specifically about the main Rick, the one the audience follows, the one who built the prison and then walked away from it and left everyone else inside. Why did Rick C-137 eventually leave the Citadel? The show does not state this with perfect clarity, but the evidence points in a consistent direction. Relations between C-137 and the other Ricks soured over time. He was, as the council member noted in Season 1, the malcontent, the one Rick who could not settle into the system even though he had helped create it. He had built the curve for reasons that were at least partly about control and safety, and then found that living inside that control felt exactly as empty as everything else had felt after Diane and Beth died. The wall around infinity did not make anything better. It just made the emptiness feel organized. So he left. He found the dimension where Rick Prime had originally come from, the home dimension of Morty Smith, the dimension that eventually becomes the main setting of the show, and he moved in with the family that Rick Prime had abandoned. Not because he loved them initially, because he believed that Rick Prime would eventually come back to that dimension. He was still hunting. He was always still hunting. He just found a place to wait that happened to contain a grandson he slowly, reluctantly, genuinely grew to care about. The Citadel continued without him. The Council of Ricks maintained the curve. The system Rick had designed ran exactly as designed. Ricks traveling through a managed portion of the multiverse, always the smartest beings in any room they entered, never exposed to a reality where that was not true. The machine underneath the Citadel kept the boundaries sealed. Rick C-137 was out there in some dimension, drinking, waiting for Rick Prime, increasingly attached to a family he had not planned on becoming attached to. And somewhere in the Citadel, a Morty with an eye patch was paying attention to details that no other Morty had ever thought to examine. Evil Morty understood something that no one around him understood. He had figured out that the multiverse every Rick and Morty traveled through was not actually infinite. He had understood, either through observation or through access to information that other Mortys did not have, that the freedom Rick presented as the whole point of their adventures was a managed illusion. That every universe they visited had been pre-selected to guarantee Rick's dominance. That the Mortys, every Morty, across every dimension inside the curve, were living inside a system designed to keep them permanently in a supporting role to someone who had engineered the supporting role into the fabric of reality itself. His response to this understanding was not anger or despair. It was a plan. A very long, very patient plan that required him to first get captured, then escape, then build influence on the Citadel slowly enough that no one recognized what he was doing until it was too late to stop it. He got himself elected president of the Citadel. He positioned himself at the center of the system, and then he used the Citadel's own power, the energy that held the curve together, to blow a hole in the boundary and walk through it into the part of the multiverse that every Rick had spent decades pretending did not exist. The yellow portal he used to escape confirmed everything. Green portals go within the curve. Yellow portals go outside it. Evil Morty's yellow portal, at the end of the Season 5 finale, was the visual proof that he had done what no one else inside the curve had ever done. He had left the room that Rick built and gone somewhere Rick's engineering could not follow. None of this would have been possible without Rick C-137's brain. Evil Morty needed the schematics schematics. He needed the original design. And the original design lived in the memory of a man who had built a prison for the multiverse, decided it was not making him feel better, and walked away from it to wait in a garage in a dimension that was not even his own. Rick built the Citadel and the Curve. He abandoned both. He left the system running without him, with all its Ricks and all its Mortys living inside it, and he moved on to a quieter and more private version of his ongoing grief. He never considered that leaving the system intact was itself a choice, that walking away from the prison without dismantling it meant everyone inside was still a prisoner, whether he was present to watch or not. Evil Morty considered it, and he made sure that Rick C-137 was the one who helped him fix it, whether Rick intended to or not. The builder of the cage became, without meaning to, the source of the key. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the cage Rick built was architectural. You can see it, map it, describe its edges. But there is a detail sitting in the background of early episodes that points to a structure underneath even the Curve, underneath even Rick's history, that the show has never fully opened. A detail so small it looks like nothing. A label on a box. 3 words written on cardboard, sitting in a garage in plain sight for the entire run of the show. Section 9. The Gravity Falls crossover was planned across 2 different networks a full year in advance. Most Easter eggs in television are small, self-contained, and made for the audience. A show puts a reference to another show in the background of a scene. A character wears a shirt with a logo from a different series. A name appears on a sign that only fans of a specific thing will recognize. These are gifts, little rewards for people who are paying close attention. Moments of warmth between creators who know each other. Signals that the people making the show are also people who love watching shows. The crossover between Rick and Morty and Gravity Falls is not an Easter egg in that sense. It is something significantly more complicated and significantly more impressive. It required 2 showrunners working on 2 different shows for 2 different television networks to coordinate a shared detail across more than 12 months of production, trusting each other to hold up their end without any guarantee that either show would still be airing when the payoff finally landed. One of them had to plant something and then wait. The other had to pick it up and place it exactly where it needed to go, almost a year later, without the coordination being visible to anyone watching either show. To understand how this happened, you need to know who Justin Roiland and Alex Hirsch are to each other. Hirsch is the creator of Gravity Falls, the animated mystery series that aired on Disney Channel starting in 2012. Roiland is the co-creator of Rick and Morty, which started on Adult Swim in 2013. The 2 of them worked together at Disney before either show existed. They shared a desk at one point during that period. They became friends. And at some point during those early years of working in animation, they made a pact, a simple one. They agreed that they would reference each other's shows in their own work. A quiet acknowledgement of their friendship built into the fabric of the worlds they were creating, visible to anyone paying close enough attention to both shows at once. What started as a friendly agreement between 2 animators turned into one of the most carefully planned, hidden connections in the history of animated television. The simple version of the crossover is easy to describe. In Gravity Falls, there is a character named Grunkle Stan who loses several specific items through a portal during an episode. Those items are a pen, a notepad, and a mug. They disappear into the portal and are gone from the Gravity Falls side of the story. In Rick and Morty, during a chase sequence where Rick opens a series of portals to lose his pursuers, several objects come flying out of one of those portals. They come from somewhere else, landing briefly in Rick's dimension before the scene moves on. Those objects are a pen, a notepad, and a mug, the exact same items, traveling from one show to the other, leaving Gravity Falls through Stan's portal and arriving in Rick and Morty through Rick's portal. The 2 fictional universes are connected by 3 ordinary objects passing between them, with each show handling one half of the journey. That much has been noticed by fans and written about in various places since both episodes aired. But the detail that makes this genuinely remarkable, the part that elevates it from a fun reference to something worth examining carefully, is the timing. The Rick and Morty episode that contains the arriving objects is close Rick counters of the Rick kind. It aired in season 1. The Gravity Falls episode that shows Grunkle Stan losing those same objects is called Society of the Blind Eye. It aired in season 2 of Gravity Falls. The Rick and Morty episode aired first, more than a full year before the Gravity Falls episode that showed where the objects came from. Sit with that for a moment. The objects arrive in Rick and Morty. They come through a portal from somewhere. The audience sees them land in Rick's dimension without knowing where they originated. Then, more than 12 months later, Gravity Falls airs an episode that shows Grunkle Stan losing those those exact objects through a portal on the Gravity Falls side. The origin of what Rick and Morty's audience had already seen lands in a completely different show on a completely different network over a year after the arrival was shown. This means Roiland and Hirsch planned this in reverse. The arrival came first, the departure came second. The audience of Rick and Morty saw the objects show up without knowing what they were. The audience of Gravity Falls saw the objects leave without knowing where they went. Only people who watched both shows on both networks across more than a year of television could put the two halves together into a complete picture. The planning required for this is significant. Roiland had to put specific objects in a specific scene in season 1 of Rick and Morty. Those objects had to match exactly what Hirsch was planning to use in Gravity Falls. Hirsch had to then write those same objects into a Gravity Falls episode that aired over a year later, placing them in a scene that made sense for his own show's story while also serving as the hidden origin point for what Roiland had already shown. Neither show could change the details without breaking the connection. Both productions had to hold the plan steady across more than 12 months of their own separate creative processes. The production of an animated television show is not a simple or stable environment. Scripts change, scenes get cut, details get altered in editing. A prop that exists in one draft of a script sometimes disappears entirely by the time the episode airs. For both Roiland and Hirsch to maintain their specific shared detail across a year of separate production through all the changes and pressures that come with making animated television required a level of mutual commitment that goes well beyond a casual, friendly nod. They did it anyway. The pen, the notepad, and the mug made the journey intact. The connection between the two shows does not stop there. The same Gravity Falls episode, Society of the Blind Eye, also contains another detail that points toward Rick and Morty, though this one is subtler and easier to miss. Gravity Falls has a recurring antagonist named Bill Cipher, a triangular dream demon who is one of the most dangerous and unsettling characters in the show's history. In Rick and Morty Season 2, during the episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, a picture of Bill Cipher can be seen on a monitor in the background of a scene where Beth and Jerry attend alien couples counseling. Bill Cipher, the villain of a Disney Channel show, is visible on a screen inside a Rick and Morty episode as a background detail that most viewers walk past without registering. These connections are not accidents. They are a friendship made visible in animation, built into shows that aired on networks that had no formal relationship with each other and no reason to coordinate their content. Roiland and Hirsch created these connections independently, based on a personal agreement between two people who used to share a workspace and decided that the worlds they were building should quietly acknowledge each other. The official Gravity Falls Journal 3, a real physical book published as a companion to the show, written from the perspective of the show's characters and containing in-universe information about the mysteries of Gravity Falls, also contains graffiti written by Rick Sanchez. Rick's handwriting, Rick's voice, Rick's specific way of looking at the world, all placed inside a Gravity Falls publication as though Rick had at some point passed through that universe and left his mark. The book is canon to Gravity Falls. Rick's presence in it is a deliberate creative choice by Hirsch, extending the connection beyond the television episodes and into the physical world of licensed merchandise. Roiland also did voice work in Gravity Falls, appearing in the show as a character. A direct, personal crossover that goes beyond hidden visual details and into the actual cast of one show containing the voice of the other show's creator. What makes all of this worth examining as a piece of hidden lore, rather than just a collection of fun facts, is what it reveals about how Rick and Morty thinks about its own universe. The show has always operated on the premise that the multiverse is real, and that travel between dimensions is possible. Portals open, objects pass through, characters move between realities. The show has used this premise to tell stories about alternate versions of the main characters, about the consequences of abandoning one universe for another, about what it means to exist in a world where every version of every possible outcome is happening somewhere. The Gravity Falls crossover takes that premise and makes it literal in a way the show almost never acknowledges directly. If objects can travel from Gravity Falls to Rick and Morty through portals, then Gravity Falls is not just a different show. It is a different universe within the same multiverse that Rick and Morty operates in. Stan's portal and Rick's portals are the same kind of technology, connecting the same infinite space of possible realities. The two shows exist in the same fictional universe, and the evidence for this is sitting in a chase sequence in Season 1 of Rick and Morty and a mystery episode in Season 2 of Gravity Falls, waiting for someone to look at both and notice that the objects match. much. Most people who love both shows have never noticed. Most people who love one of them have never seen the other. The connection was built for the smallest possible audience, the group of people who were watching both shows on both networks, paying close enough attention to background details that they would recognize a pen and a notepad and a mug as something they had seen before. The payoff for being in that specific group is the realization that two of the most beloved animated shows of their era are not separate things. They are windows into the same world, made by two friends who sat at the same desk and decided, without telling anyone, that their fictional universes would secretly share the same sky. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That level of commitment to a hidden connection, planned across networks, across more than a year of production, across multiple episodes and a published book, is unusual enough in television to deserve real attention. But the show's commitment to hiding things is not limited to what it shares with other shows. The deepest hidden things in Rick and Morty are the things it hid about itself, about its own origins, about a theme song that was never supposed to belong to this show, about a pilot written on a floor in 6 hours, about the accidental foundations of something that became enormous and precise. Section 10. The theme music was never written for this show, and neither was the pilot. There is a version of Rick and Morty that does not exist. It aired on no network, reached no audience, and left almost no trace except for the pieces that got quietly moved into a different show when the original project fell apart. The music you hear at the start of every Rick and Morty episode was written for that version. The second episode of Rick and Morty was built from the ideas that were supposed to fill that version's entire run. The dog that inspired one of the show's main character names came from the life of the man who created that version. The show that became Rick and Morty was assembled, in significant part, from the wreckage of something else entirely. And almost nobody who has ever watched Rick and Morty knows that the sound they most associate with the show, the opening notes of the theme that plays before every episode begins, was composed for a cartoon about intelligent dogs and enslaved humans that never made it past the pitch stage. Start with the theme music. Ryan Elder is the composer who wrote the Rick and Morty theme. He has been involved with the show's music from the beginning, and his work is woven into the identity of the series in a way that goes beyond background sound. The opening theme is immediately recognizable. Electronic, slightly unsettling, built around a melody that feels like it is moving through space at the same time as the visuals show exactly that. It is one of the most distinctive theme songs in modern animation. Elder did not write it for Rick and Morty. He wrote it for a completely different Justin Roiland project called Dog World. The show's concept was exactly what the name suggests: a planet where dogs had evolved into the intelligent, dominant species, and humans were the ones who had been domesticated and kept as pets. Roiland was developing Dog World in 2012 as a potential Cartoon Network series. Elder composed the theme for that project during that period. The music was designed to fit the tone and feeling of the Dog World concept, which Roiland described as more kid-oriented than what Rick and Morty eventually became, but still built around the same kind of strange premise that characterized his work. Dog World did not get made. The development process moved too slowly. Roiland was also in the early stages of conversations with Dan Harmon about what would become Rick and Morty, and as that project began to take real shape and demand real attention, Dog World stalled and then stopped moving entirely. The show was abandoned. The pilot was never produced. The network deal never materialized into anything, but the theme music existed. Elder had written it, recorded it, and it was sitting there, a complete piece of music that had been made for a show that was not going to happen. When Rick and Morty began coming together and needed a theme, Roiland brought Elder's Dog World composition into the new project. The music that had been designed for a story about intelligent dogs was adapted and used as the opening of a story about a genius scientist and his grandson traveling the multiverse. The second episode of Rick and Morty makes this history even more visible. That episode, Lawnmower Dog, involves a plotline where the family dog Snuffles is given a device that increases his intelligence dramatically. Snuffles becomes smarter than the humans around him. He organizes other dogs. They develop technology. They begin building toward a future where dogs are the dominant species and humans serve them. The episode is, in its core concept, Dog World. The show that never got made became the second episode of the show that did. Roiland took the premise he had been developing for an entire series and compressed it into 22 minutes, placed it in Rick and Morty's second slot, and moved on. The dog's name in that episode is Snuffles. The dog that Jerry is later named after, Roiland's real-life pet dog, passed away during the production of the show's later seasons, which Roiland mentioned publicly. The show's universe contains traces of Roiland's actual life in ways that go beyond the usual relationship relationship between a creator and their work. Now set the music and the dog world connection aside and look at the pilot itself. Because the origin of the first episode of Rick and Morty is one of the strangest and most unlikely stories in the history of how television gets made, Dan Harmon was, at the time Rick and Morty was being developed, still working as the showrunner on Community, the NBC comedy he had created and that had become known for being one of the most creatively ambitious and emotionally complicated sitcoms on network television.
Writing Community was not a small job. It was demanding and chaotic and consumed enormous amounts of Harmon's time and energy. He was not, by any reasonable measure, someone with extra hours in his schedule to sit down and write a pilot for a new animated show on a different network. Harmon and Roiland pitched Rick and Morty to Nick Weidenfeld, the person in charge of program development at Adult Swim. The pitch worked. Weidenfeld was interested. The deal was essentially made in the room, or close to it. Weidenfeld got up to leave after the meeting, heading out of Harmon's office at the Community production space. Harmon's office was empty at the time. Not just tidy, actually empty, unfurnished. Harmon was using it as a place to work, but had not filled it with the usual furniture and equipment that offices tend to accumulate. The room contained almost nothing except the people in it. As Weidenfeld was walking out, Roiland stopped Harmon from leaving too. He said something direct and specific. He told Harmon that if Harmon went home now, it might take them 3 months to actually write the pilot together. Schedules would interfere. Community would demand Harmon's attention. The momentum of having just sold the idea would fade into the ordinary difficulty of finding time to execute it. Roiland's proposal was simple. Stay here, right now, on the floor of this empty office and write the pilot tonight. Harmon agreed. The two of them sat cross-legged on the floor of an empty Community production office with their laptops and wrote the first episode of Rick and Morty in 6 hours. 6 hours. The pilot of one of the most carefully constructed, densely layered animated shows of its era was written in a single evening, on a floor, because one of its creators had a feeling that leaving the building would mean the show never got made. Roiland described it afterward as lightning in a bottle.
The phrase is a cliche, but it is accurate in a specific way here. Lightning in a bottle means something that happened exactly once, under exactly those conditions, that could not be recreated by trying to repeat the circumstances. The 6-hour pilot session was not a strategy. It was not a planned creative approach to writing television. It was two people who had just sold an idea deciding to capture the energy of having just sold it before that energy had time to dissipate into scheduling conflicts and competing demands. Harmon has reflected on that night in interviews with a mixture of pride and slight disbelief. He was running a network television show. He had obligations the next day. The floor of an empty office was not a conventional writing environment. And yet, the thing they produced in those 6 hours became the foundation of everything that followed. The characters, the tone, the specific dynamic between Rick and Morty that every subsequent episode built on. The pilot was not perfect. First episodes of shows rarely are, and Rick and Morty's first episode has the rough quality of something that was assembled quickly and then refined by everything that came after it. But it established enough. The relationship, the garage, the family, the portal gun, the sense that this show was going to operate by its own rules, rather than by the usual rules of animated television, that it gave the writers something real to build from. Now consider what the show is built on at its foundations. A theme song composed for a different show that never aired. A second episode assembled from the unused premise of that same failed project. A pilot written on a floor in 6 hours because one of its creators had a premonition that leaving the building would cost them 3 months. A character name borrowed from a real dog who later passed away. A secret plot arc canceled because a stranger on the internet thought too carefully about the show before the show was ready to be thought about that carefully. None of these are the foundations you would design if you were trying to build something with care and intention from the start. They are the foundations of something that survived its own origins through luck and speed, and the kind of creative chemistry that cannot be planned or scheduled or reproduced. Roiland and Harmon did not sit down and carefully construct the ideal conditions for making a great show. They stumbled into the conditions, recognized them as something rare, and moved fast enough to capture what was there before it disappeared. There is a specific kind of thing that gets created this way. Not better or worse than things that are carefully planned. Different. Things made under pressure, with leftover parts, in empty rooms, by people who trusted that moving quickly was more important than moving perfectly. Those things carry the texture of their own creation in them. You can feel the speed and the improvisation underneath the surface of the finished work, even when you cannot name what you are feeling. Rick and Morty has that texture. It always has. The theme plays, and it was written for dogs. The second episode exists, and it was supposed to be an entire show. The pilot happened, and it was written on a floor in the time it takes to watch 3 movies. The show that resulted from these accidents became one of the most precisely constructed
constructed, most densely layered, most carefully maintained animated series of its generation. The gap between those two things, the accidental origins and the meticulous result, is the hidden story of what Rick and Morty actually is. Not a show that was designed to be this good, a show that became this good despite, or possibly because of, the specific accidents and rescues and last-minute decisions that brought it into existence. Ryan Elder's Dog World theme plays over a universe that Rick built and then abandoned. A catchphrase that translates to a cry for help. A spy who was working from the first crowd scene she ever appeared in. A secret that a stranger on the internet figured out before the writers were ready to tell it. And a wall around infinity that the smartest man in the multiverse constructed and then walked away from because even a perfect prison does not feel like home. All of it began on a floor, in an empty office, in 6 hours, because one man had a feeling that leaving would mean losing something that had not yet been made. That feeling was correct, and everything else in this essay is what grew from it. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.